The mist drifted through the narrow streets of Tekali, veiling the stone facades in a cold gray shroud. Dawn had not yet broken. Only the thick smoke from chimneys and the rising vapor of rain-soaked earth hung heavy in the air. The city seemed reluctant to wake, as though fearing that the ordinary rhythm of life could no longer mask the dark events that had unsettled its people. Father Hernandez quickened his pace toward the church, burdened by a strange and unshakable foreboding. His heart beat with unusual unease. Perhaps it was the familiar tremor that came before entering the house of God, or perhaps it was something far deeper, something heard only in the stillness of the sanctuary, when ancient stone walls whispered forgotten secrets. Crossing the threshold, his eyes were drawn immediately to the altar. Don Sebastian's body lay there, unnervingly still. His face was twisted in a mask of pain, or was it fear, and his hands were clenched as though holding fast to the last fragile thread that might have saved his soul. The air itself seemed dense, pressing down upon the room until it felt almost palpable. "What has happened?" the priest whispered as he stepped closer. The old physician, Dr. Ramirez, who had arrived moments earlier, removed his gloves with deliberate care. His eyes that had witnessed decades of sickness and death, now carried an unease he could not disguise. "An injury," he murmured. "He fell, or someone made him fall." A chill coursed down Father Hernandez's spine. His hand instinctively gripped the edge of his robe, his thoughts drifting back to the last words of Don Sebastian, spoken only days before, words of strange disturbances in the city, of secrets straining to be revealed. On the floor beside the body lay a crumpled, dirt-stained sheet of paper, instantly recognizable by its handwriting. Don Sebastian's hand. With care the priest unfolded it, and as his eyes scanned the lines, his heart faltered. The words spoke of confessions altered, of voices that were not real, of something darker still, something Hernandez could not yet comprehend. The days that followed unraveled his peace. Each encounter with his parishioners became a torment. They recalled confessions he had no memory of hearing. The first proof came from Dona Carmen Ruiz. Her eyes glistened with gratitude, yet her words shattered him. She spoke of letters, of guidance he had never offered. That night, Father Hernandez remained alone in the darkness of his study. He prayed, piecing together fragments of truth, and hated what began to take shape in his mind. Someone possessed his voice. Someone had infiltrated the most sacred of spaces, the seal of confession itself, and that someone was nearer than he dared to imagine. Then he remembered. Magdalena. The young sister who amused parishioners with her talent for mimicry. If she could so perfectly imitate women's voices, was it possible she had found a way to echo his own? The next day he resolved to test his suspicion. Hidden in the shadows of the confessional, he watched. What he saw left no room for doubt. Isabel sat in his place, and her voice, when she spoke, was indistinguishable from his own. Horror closed in on him. The Vasquez sisters and their cruel, calculated design were no longer shadows of rumor but flesh and blood. Their schemes knew no limits, and Don Sebastian's death had been only the first step in a dark game that threatened to consume the entire city. Father Hernandez's heart ached with dread and revulsion. Yet he knew one thing with certainty: the truth must be spoken, even if the cost was his very life. Days in Tekali passed beneath a veil of deceptive calm. Since the death of Don Sebastian had shaken the city, every street seemed quieter, as though the very walls held their breath before a mystery too dangerous to name. Father Hernandez spent the first hours after the discovery in tortured reflection, gathering fragments of evidence before daring to act. He knew the Vasquez sisters were dangerous, and that even the smallest misstep could unleash unforeseen consequences. His first move was cautious conversation with his parishioners. With feigned pastoral interest in their daily troubles, he watched their expressions, listening for words that hinted at confessions he had never heard. What he uncovered was chilling. Each time the sisters contrived to draw him away on some trivial errand, someone entered the confessional and emerged burdened with secrets that should never have been spoken. Dona Carmen Ruiz was only the first. Others followed. Young Felipe Morales, who recalled advice about his vineyard the priest had never given. Senora Juana Cortez, who spoke of a family quarrel soothed by his silence, though he had offered no such counsel. and a boy who remembered words of encouragement for his studies, as if from Father Hernandez himself, yet Hernandez had never spoken them. Each story weighed heavily upon his heart. He realized it was not only his voice that had been stolen, but also the power to bend the entire community. A deeper terror crept into him. If they could counterfeit his voice, what other secrets had they stolen? Whose lives had they reshaped, leaving no soul untouched? He resolved then to watch the sisters more closely. Magdalena, the youngest and most fickle, basked in the attention, moving with careless grace through the church, mimicking his voice at precisely the right moments. Isabel, colder and more calculating, directed the deception with precision, ensuring that every parishioner who entered the confessional emerged subtly altered. Father Hernandez knew he must tread carefully. He devised a plan to catch them in the act, arranging for civilian witnesses. The next day, during Mass, he pretended to busy himself with preparations for the ceremony, then silently slipped back into the confessional. What he saw rooted him to the spot. Isabel, seated in his place, serving a parishioner with flawless imitation of his voice. Terror seized him. All doubt vanished. The sisters had defiled the sacrament itself, and Don Sebastian had paid with his life for daring to expose them. Hernandez withdrew silently, his resolve hardening. He would gather every piece of evidence and summon the authorities before confronting them. The confrontation would be perilous, but justice must prevail, even if it shattered the faith of an entire flock. Terror seized him. All doubt vanished. The sisters had defiled the sacrament itself, and Don Sebastian had paid with his life for daring to expose them. Hernandez withdrew silently, his resolve hardening. He would gather every piece of evidence and summon the authorities before confronting them. The confrontation would be perilous, but justice must prevail, even if it shattered the faith of an entire flock. That night, he filled page after page with everything he had seen and every testimony he had collected. His desk lay buried under scrolls and hurried notes, many nearly illegible from trembling hands. Each word was a reminder of betrayal, each line a testimony to the danger festering within the church walls. He knew he could trust no one save the civil authorities, and his own wary judgment. At dawn, he dispatched a secret message to Tekali sheriff, urging him to come to the church at once. No names, no details, only that it was a matter of utmost urgency, a threat to the community's very safety. While he waited, Hernandez reviewed his evidence again and again, scraps of paper, parishioners' recollections, the proof of voice mimicry he had witnessed with his own eyes. It all pointed to a scheme meticulously crafted by the Vasquez sisters, its scale filling him with silent dread. When the bailiff arrived, a stern man with a piercing gaze, Hernandez led him into the confessional and explained with measured words, forcing his voice to remain steady. "There is something in this church," he said, "something that defiles the faith itself. We must act before greater ruin is done." The plan was simple but perilous. Wait for one of the sisters to mimic his voice, document the act, and present the proof before the bailiff and a chosen circle of witnesses. Each step required precision. The faintest hint of suspicion could drive them into deeper shadows. For the next week, Hernandez lived as though nothing had changed, hearing confessions, tending to his flock, watching with unwavering vigilance every step of Magdalena and Isabel. At last, the chance came. Magdalena, confident and careless, approached the confessional, invoking some fabricated emergency of a parishioner. From the shadows, Hernandez watched, etching every detail into memory. Isabel sat with composed calm, and when she spoke, her words carried his voice perfectly, while Magdalena recorded the exchange with practiced ease. Hernandez held his breath. He had everything. Proof of his suspicions, evidence of a crime that reached beyond treachery into the profanation of the sacred. There was no turning back. That very day, with the bailiff and select witnesses gathered in secret, Father Hernandez confronted the Vasquez sisters. The air trembled with tension, each glance, each breath threatened to ignite the storm that could alter Tekali forever. "Magdalena. Isabel," he said, his voice at once steady and trembling, "we know what you have done. Every confession stolen, every secret fabricated, every lie cloaked in piety, it is all laid bare." A silence fell like stone. Only the distant murmur of curious parishioners outside stirred the air. The mask of innocence the sisters had worn for months began to fracture. Magdalena denied everything, but the evidence was irrefutable. Isabel, more cunning, saw resistance was useless. The confrontation Father Hernandez had so carefully prepared now pressed toward its climax. The church was suffocating in its stillness. All eyes fixed upon the confessional, where Magdalena and Isabel stood exposed, their web of deception unraveled. Father Hernandez drew a deep breath and began, with unwavering voice, to recount every piece of evidence gathered in those dreadful weeks, confessions he never heard, the torn paper from Don Sebastian's hand, and finally, the perfect imitation of his own voice, witnessed with his own eyes. Magdalena at first denied everything. Her pale face and trembling hands betrayed the confidence she once wore so easily. Yet with every detail Father Hernandez recounted, sharper than the last, the facade crumbled. Isabel, meanwhile, remained silent, measuring each word, each gesture. At last, with chilling composure, she spoke. "Yes," she said evenly, "we did all that we are accused of. For more than a year we controlled the flow of knowledge, manipulated the community, listened to confessions not our own, and wielded stolen secrets for power and gain. We never imagined anyone would go so far as to expose us." Magdalena, no longer able to sustain her lies, confessed through sobs, revealing horrors that froze the blood of those present. She told how they had listened to hundreds of confessions, learned to mimic voices, and used that skill to extort, to manipulate, to hold Tekali in absolute dominion. Their work was recorded in her own journals, hidden in the corners of the church in the sisters' home. Father Hernandez listened with a pounding heart as the bailiff carefully recorded every word, ensuring nothing was omitted from the official record. The magnitude of the crime surpassed his darkest imaginings. Not only had they shattered the sacred trust between penitent and confessor, they had murdered Don Sebastian to keep their secret. Cold and deliberate, they had struck him down with a chalice and laid his body upon the altar, arranging the scene as a tragic accident. Their cruelty and cunning were undeniable. The trial that followed became the greatest scandal in Tekali's history. The entire community was thrown into turmoil. Tales of betrayal, fraud, and murder were whispered on every street, in every home. The Vasquez sisters were condemned to death, and their execution upon the city's main square was witnessed by all. To the very end they remained composed, their calmness more unsettling than any display of remorse could have been. Father Hernandez never fully recovered. Betrayal and horror haunted him until his death 3 years later, consumed by the grief of having been an unwitting instrument in their crime, a witness to the shattering of his community's trust. He ordered the confessional where the imposture had taken place to be burned and replaced, though he knew no wood nor stone could erase the stain of what had transpired. In time, the Church of Santa Maria sought to restore its reputation, but the shadow of the Vasquez sisters lingered for decades. Many townsfolk abandoned the sacrament of confession, and some forsook Tekali altogether, unable to reconcile betrayal with the faith that once bound them together. The story of Magdalena and Isabel endured as a warning, a reminder of how evil, masked as virtue, may creep even into the holiest of places. The true legacy of their crimes was not only the death of a man or the ruin of trust, but the revelation that even the deepest faith may be twisted into a weapon of manipulation and fear. In the heart of Tekali remained the memory of stolen secrets and counterfeit voices, whispering to any who dared to listen the dark lesson of treachery disguised as devotion. The days following the sisters' execution brought a strange silence over Tekali. The church bells rang not to summon prayer, but as grim reminders of the betrayal that had defiled the town's heart. Few dared to enter the church. Those who did walked softly, fearing that the secrets they once entrusted might still be overheard. Even after his reassignment to another parish, Father Hernandez received letters from Tekali. Each was steeped in fear and mistrust. Some neighbors expressed gratitude that justice had been done, others admitted they could no longer look upon their friends and kin without suspicion. The sense of community was broken, perhaps beyond repair. In the sisters' now empty home, the curious discovered fragments of documents and notes detailing the scale of their schemes. Each page was a chilling testimony of how two women controlled entire lives from the shadows, using faith as a weapon, secrecy as currency. Their precision and detachment seemed almost inhuman, revealing that this was not mere wickedness, but a plan cultivated with patience and ruthless intent. Rumors persisted of strange voices in the old confessional, phantom whispers recalling stolen confessions and overheard secrets. Villagers swore they felt the sisters' presence long after their deaths, as though the shadow of their treachery had been sealed into the very stones. Faith endured, but it mingled with a silent fear that even the devout could not shake. Father Hernandez spent hours contemplating the fragility of human trust. He came to understand that no place, however sacred, was beyond corruption, that anyone with will and cunning might exploit the faith of others. The lesson weighed upon him for the rest of his life, a constant reminder to beware of virtue's mask. In Tekali, while some gradually returned to the church, others stayed away, remembering too well that even the purest hearts can be vulnerable. The tale of the Vasquez sisters passed into oral legend, dark teachings shared across generations, stories of deceit, ambition, and the human power to cloak evil in the guise of devotion. Even as Santa Maria strove to reclaim its central place in Tekali's life, the shadow of those crimes never lifted. Offerings dwindled, and the community learned caution, realizing that faith itself may serve as fertile ground for those who seek power and control. By then aged and wearied by grief, Father Hernandez ended each day in silent prayer, prayers not only for the sins of the living, but for the secrets that had destroyed his flock. He knew the hardest lesson was not the justice that fell upon the sisters, but the revelation that betrayal may spring from the least expected places, even from those we trust most dearly. And so Tekali endured, its heart torn between devotion and memory of betrayal. With every toll of the bell, the people were reminded not only of prayer, but of the grim truth that even the holiest ground can shelter the darkest shadows of man. Years after the events that had scarred Tekali, the Church of Santa Maria still stood, but its atmosphere was steeped in suspicion. Its walls, though restored, seemed to absorb every whisper, every confession, reminding all that the past never vanishes without a trace. The townspeople spoke little of the Vasquez sisters, yet the elders whispered warnings to their children and grandchildren. The descendants of those once blackmailed lived with quiet caution, knowing that the vulnerability of trust could always return. Stolen secrets had left invisible scars, and some families never again felt completely safe. The memory of Tekali, though painful, became a mirror through which each generation learned to read appearances. Father Hernandez, now aged and weary, continued his pastoral work in a new parish, but the shadow of what had happened never left him. In his letters and sermons, veiled though they were, he warned of the importance of prudence, acknowledging that even the holiest places could become arenas of deceit. His words, marked by the experience of betrayal, struck deeply in those who heard them, leaving lessons that reached far beyond religion and touched the very fabric of life. Meanwhile, in the archives of the Bishopric of Puebla, historians and theologians studied documents, records, and testimonies about the Vasquez sisters. Every detail of their schemes was carefully analyzed, in an attempt to understand how two women had managed to manipulate an entire town. Their methods of vocal imitation, their cunning, and the cold determination with which they carried out their crimes became examples of moral decay and the devastating power of manipulation. But beyond archives and investigations, the true legacy of the sisters lingered in Tekali's collective memory. Every inhabitant carried the mark of mistrust, a warning that reshaped their relationships with one another. Gatherings in the plaza, once joyous and open, became more measured. Conversations about private matters were approached with caution, and faith, though still alive, existed in a fragile balance of devotion and fear. The younger generation, raised after the crimes, heard the story as if it were legend, yet even they grasped the weight of what had occurred. Magdalena and Isabel Vasquez, though executed, continued to exert their influence, not through their deeds, but through the memory of what they had been capable of. The community had learned that evil is not always measured by brute strength, but by cunning and the ability to exploit trust. Each night, as the wind swept through the streets of Tekali and the echo of distant bells carried on the air, the people reminded themselves that betrayal could outlive any punishment. The tale of the Vasquez sisters became an eternal warning. Even the purest hearts must be guarded, and vigilance must never be abandoned, for evil disguised as virtue always lurks where least expected. Decades passed since the execution of the Vasquez sisters, and Tekali seemed to recover some semblance of normal life. Yet beneath this surface calm, memories of their crimes still lived on. The descendants of those once ensnared by the sisters grew up hearing whispered cautions: never trust blindly, not even those who seem the most pious. One autumn afternoon, as the sun sank behind the rooftops of the plaza, a young historian named Rodrigo Mendez arrived in Tekali. His interest in the town's history had led him to the archives of the bishopric of Puebla, where he had uncovered ancient manuscripts about the Vasquez sisters. Rodrigo was not seeking sensation. He wished to understand how two women had bent an entire community to their will. Visiting the Church of Santa Maria, Rodrigo felt something unsettling. Though its walls had been restored and the confessional replaced, a heavy atmosphere seemed to hang over the place. The townsfolk looked at him with curiosity and a trace of suspicion, as if his interest in the past might awaken memories they preferred to keep buried. In his investigation, Rodrigo gained access to letters, diaries, and forgotten records never presented in court. Among them he discovered the notes of Father Hernandez, who had laid out his suspicions in detail before uncovering the truth. Each line revealed the torment of a man torn between faith and betrayal, a man who had come to understand that even the sacred could be deceived. Yet the most disturbing discoveries were testimonies that had never reached the tribunal. People who had lived in Tekali during the sisters' time spoke of strange encounters, interrupted confessions, voices that mimicked Father Hernandez, whispers in the dark. Some swore that even after the sisters' deaths, they felt their presence lingering, as if the shadow of their treachery still haunted the church. Rodrigo realized that the story of the Vasquez sisters was not merely one of crime and punishment, but a lesson in human frailty. Trust, once carefully nurtured in the community, had been irreparably broken. The collective memory of Tekali could not forget, and the secrets of the past continued to shape the lives of its people. That night, while poring over ancient manuscripts by candlelight, Rodrigo heard a whisper that made him freeze. The breeze stirred the curtains, and the church's echo seemed to amplify every sound. For a fleeting moment, he thought he recognized a voice, the whisper mimicking the familiar tone of Father Hernandez. His heart raced. Impossible, he told himself, yet he could not shake the feeling that something from the past had seeped into the present. In that instant, he understood that the story of Tekali and the Vasquez sisters was not over. The secrets had not died with the culprits. The shadows they had sown remained, shaping the memories and the actions of those who endured. And as Rodrigo recorded every detail, he realized he had uncovered something greater than a mere historical tragedy. He had found a reminder that evil, cloaked in virtue, can be passed from generation to generation. A few days after his first visit to the church, Rodrigo returned to the archives of the bishopric, determined to examine every document connected to the Vasquez sisters. Sorting through the dusty boxes, he discovered an envelope sealed with red wax, worn with age. It bore no official reference, only a name written in the unmistakable hand of Don Sebastián Vilches. With trembling hands, Rodrigo broke the seal. Inside lay a letter never read in public, a private testimony penned by the scribe before his death. The ink had smudged in places, but the words remained clear and chilling. Don Sebastián recounted secret meetings with the sisters, describing how they had gradually begun to manipulate confessions, seizing on every misstep of Father Hernandez. But most troubling was a section in which he spoke of a third accomplice, whose identity he had managed to keep hidden even from the priest. The name, partially erased by ink, hinted at another figure, someone who had watched and guarded the sisters' scheme. A cold shiver ran down Rodrigo's spine. For centuries, the official story had pointed only to Magdalena and Isabel. Yet now, there was the possibility that behind their web of blackmail stood someone else. It would explain the precision of their actions, and how they had managed to maintain the illusion of piety for so long. Determined to uncover the truth, Rodrigo began to investigate the prominent families of Tekali who had lived in that era. Each interview, each forgotten letter revealed hints of silent complicity. Some descendants recalled rumors of a visiting priest who was always present at important confessions. Others mentioned suspicious business dealings that had enriched certain families during the very height of the sisters' influence. When night fell over Tekali, Rodrigo realized that the story he had studied for years was far from finished. The shadows of the past stretched wider than anyone could have imagined, and the truth threatened to tarnish the reputations of those who still held power in the town. Don Sebastian's letter was a warning. Even in death, secrets could remain hidden, waiting for someone bold enough to uncover them. That same night, Rodrigo resolved to return to the Church of Santa Maria. The air was heavy, each step echoing like a whispered caution. Shining his lantern toward the confessional, he recalled the voices he had heard before, the whispers that had chilled his blood. It was possible, he thought, that the third conspirator, the unknown accomplice, was still near, ensuring that the truth remained buried. The young historian knew that what he was about to uncover would not only reshape the history of the Vasquez sisters but also test the limits of his own courage. Tekali was not merely a town with a dark past, it was a place where betrayal, manipulation, and fear had left indelible scars. And Rodrigo was determined to bring light into every corner of that shadow, no matter the cost. The first rays of dawn had barely touched the rooftops of Tekali when Rodrigo decided to remain in the church once more. Don Sebastian's letter still haunted his thoughts, and the possibility of a third accomplice kept him in constant tension. This time, he was not unprepared. He carried a notebook, a camera flash, and a small medical kit, ready for whatever he might encounter. As he examined the confessional, a faint rustle stirred behind him. His heart lurched. Slowly, he turned, and in the dim glow of stained glass he saw a figure, a tall man cloaked in dark robes, his face familiar yet not immediately recognizable. "Who's there?" Rodrigo asked, fighting to steady his trembling voice. The figure moved calmly, pulling from his mantle a crumpled parchment. "Do not fear," the man said in a deep, resonant voice. "I have been waiting for someone who could understand what truly happened here." Rodrigo frowned in confusion. "Who are you? What do you want?" "My name does not matter," the man replied. "Know only this: what you are beginning to uncover runs deeper than you imagine." The Vasquez sisters did not act alone. There were others, those who aided, watched, and manipulated from the shadows. "I was one of them, but I have come to help you." A chill coursed down Rodrigo's spine. Each word echoed the warnings of Don Sebastian's letter. The man continued. "For years I have guarded secrets that could destroy families, reputations, the very peace of Tekali. The sisters were but pieces on a board whose entirety you have yet to see. But the truth must be revealed, no matter how painful." Before Rodrigo could reply, the man pressed the parchment into his hands and vanished into the shadows like a ghost. Unfolding it, Rodrigo found a map of the church, marked with faint symbols at places he had never noticed before, hidden passages, secret compartments within the confessional, and rooms that appeared ordinary but concealed compromising documents and artifacts. That night Rodrigo understood that his investigation had only just begun. Tekali was not merely steeped in lies and betrayals, it was a labyrinth of secrets, carefully guarded by decades of fear and power. And he, a simple historian, now stood at the center of a game that could cost him far more than reputation. As the night wind howled through the walls of Santa Maria, Rodrigo swore he would not stop until he uncovered every secret, every betrayal, every truth long concealed by the Vasquez sisters and their accomplices. The story of Tekali was about to be rewritten forever. He spent the night studying the map, carefully noting each place marked by the mysterious stranger. As the morning light pierced the stained glass of Santa Maria, his resolve hardened. He would explore every corner of the church, no matter the risk. His first destination was the confessional, the very heart of the sisters' treachery. Inspecting its wooden surface, he noticed a small relief that seemed oddly out of place, a hidden latch, invisible at first glance. Pressing it, he felt a section of the panel shift aside, revealing a narrow passage. A damp, wooden scent rose from within, mingled with the faint aroma of candle wax. Taking a deep breath, Rodrigo switched on his lantern and stepped inside. Each creak of the floorboards echoed as though magnified, making him feel like another witness to his own dread. The corridor wound its way to a small secret chamber beneath the sacristy. There he discovered boxes filled with documents, scrolls, and books, false confessions, lists of names, dates, and secrets, all catalogued with chilling precision. Among the papers lay a notebook belonging to the mysterious visitor, filled with records of complicity within the community. Merchants, local authorities, even members of the clergy had long been ensnared in manipulation. The network of control in Tekali was far more vast than he had ever imagined. His heart pounded, revealing such knowledge could shatter entire families, but concealing it would mean allowing injustice to endure. A sudden metallic sound startled him, footsteps descending into the church basement. Rodrigo extinguished his lantern and hid in the shadows. Through the dim light, he saw a familiar figure emerge, Dona Eugenia, the parish accountant who had quietly worked beside the sisters for years. In her hands she carried a box, apparently filled with new compromising documents. Rodrigo realized that betrayal was still alive. The sisters had left behind not just memories of manipulation but disciples who had continued their work. Each secret unveiled opened the door to another, multiplying into new webs of intrigue and danger. With his pulse racing, Rodrigo memorized every detail, knowing that from this moment on, each step he took could be watched. Tekali did not sleep in darkness, and he would have to move with caution. As he emerged from the hidden passage, the morning sun cast colors across the floor through the stained glass, figures that seemed to dance, a reminder that even beauty could mask treachery. Rodrigo knew his path was only beginning. The story of Tekali was not merely that of the Vasquez sisters, it was a web of secrets, lies, and silence he was now fated to unravel. And he was determined to see it through, no matter how deep the labyrinth of silence might stretch. He returned home with a racing heart, his mind in turmoil. Every step along the streets of Tekali felt shadowed by unseen eyes. Dona Eugenia's revelation had made him realize that corruption had not perished with the sisters' deaths, it lived on, feeding on the fear and greed of those around him. That same night, while reviewing the documents he had found, a faint knock rattled his window. Rising cautiously, he found no one outside. But upon turning back, he saw a small black envelope placed upon his desk. Inside was a note, written in the same unmistakable hand as the stranger who had given him the map weeks before. Trust no one. They watch you more closely than you imagine. Truth reveals itself only to those willing to lose everything. The message hardened his resolve, but also deepened his fear. Now he knew his every move was being tracked. He resolved to proceed carefully, gathering enough evidence before confronting the sisters' surviving accomplices. The next day, Rodrigo returned to the church, this time to explore another place, the bell tower, from which the entire plaza and the roads into town could be seen. Climbing the narrow staircase, he felt each groaning step draw him deeper into forbidden ground, into a place where secrets clung to dust and shadow. At the top he discovered an old built-in cabinet, seemingly abandoned. Opening it, he found a collection of sealed letters, many addressed to Tekali's most powerful citizens, all signed with the names of the Vasquez sisters, some even dated after their deaths. The sight struck him like a blow. Someone had continued their work, manipulating, threatening, and silently collecting secrets. As he examined the letters, a creak sounded behind him. He turned quickly, but saw only sunlight spilling through broken panes. Still, the sense of being watched would not leave him. He understood then that he had provoked something dangerous. The hidden accomplices knew an investigation was underway, and soon they would act to protect their secrets. That night Rodrigo resolved to proceed with care. He began to draft a plan, to document the evidence, to identify the accomplices, and to find a way to expose them without becoming their next victim. Every decision was a precarious balance between truth and survival. But as he wrote, a chilling thought seized him. If the sisters' secrets had corrupted even those who seemed most devoted to the community, how many other shadows, masked as virtue, still lurked in Tekali? Rodrigo realized that the true battle was only beginning. Tekali was not just a town, it was a labyrinth of secrets. And he would have to walk its winding paths without losing himself to the darkness that waited at every turn. Rodrigo spent a sleepless night, poring over every letter he had discovered in the belfry. Some carried open threats, others whispered subtle manipulations, yet all were designed for the same purpose, to keep Tekali under control from the shadows. Each familiar name stirred in him a storm of fear and resolve, faces he thought he knew, people once cloaked in innocence, now revealed in their true and darker light. By morning, Rodrigo resolved to begin with someone close to the sisters, Dona Mercedes, the apothecary and Magdalena's confidant in her final years. He approached the shop with measured strides, though his heart pounded as if to betray him. One wrong word, one misplaced glance, could unravel everything. Dona Mercedes greeted him with her customary warmth, yet Rodrigo caught the flicker in her eyes, a guarded brightness, a silence that hinted at watchfulness. "Good morning, Rodrigo. What brings you here so early?" she asked, carefully polishing a glass vial. Rodrigo hesitated, weighing each word before he let it pass his lips. "Dona Mercedes, I must ask you about the Vasquez sisters, about their actions after death." Her expression faltered for an instant, and Rodrigo did not miss it. "After their death? Rodrigo, you know they can harm no one anymore. That is all behind us." Her voice wavered, as though straining to veil a hidden truth. He pressed, gently but firmly. "I found letters, dated after their deaths. Letters that seemed to bear their hand. Do you know anything of this?" Her throat tightened, a flash of guilt crossed her gaze. "Rodrigo, some things are best left undiscovered. Some truths destroy more than we dare imagine." But Rodrigo could not turn away. Each secret the sisters had woven needed unmasking, each accomplice deserved to be known. "I must know the truth, Dona Mercedes. Tekali deserves the truth. I cannot allow their legacy of fear to endure." The apothecary fell into silence. At last she lowered her eyes and whispered, "Not all those letters were theirs, some were written by others, those who exploited the fear they left behind. If you wish to survive, Rodrigo, guard your trust well. The eyes of Tekali are everywhere." He left the shop heavy with the weight of her warning. The danger was larger than he imagined, not only the sisters' remnants, but a living web of accomplices still moving in the dark. On the streets he felt their gaze upon him, lingering from corners, trailing each step. The city itself seemed alive, watching, judging, waiting to see if he too would be trapped in its labyrinth of secrets. That same day, Rodrigo returned home and began to map out allies and enemies in his mind. No one could be trusted completely, yet he had to act. The first thread linking the sisters to their surviving conspirators lay before him, and he would follow it, into the darkest chambers of Tekali, if need be. That night, he returned to Santa Maria. The echo of prayers, the flicker of candles, and the solemn hush of the nave wrapped him in a funereal shroud. The confessional, burned and rebuilt decades earlier, still groaned like a scarred relic of the Vasquez crimes. Carrying an oil lamp, he moved toward the sacristy. Damp air pressed against him, thick with incense long faded. But he was not alone. A whisper rose, soft, steady, as if in prayer. He snuffed the lamp and pressed himself behind a shelf, his heart hammering. The voice was chillingly familiar, the measured cadence of Father Hernandez, the priest whose name haunted local tales. Yet the tone was imitation, precise and eerie, as though someone had resurrected his voice to hear confessions in the dark, without a single penitent present. Rodrigo froze. From the shadows emerged a figure in a dark cassock. Not a priest he knew. The stranger carried a notebook filled with names, dates, fragments of confessions. Rodrigo's stomach dropped. The network was alive, new confessions forged, manipulated, cataloged just as the sisters had done. The stranger moved to the altar, lit a candle, and murmured, "Shadows do not die, they merely change their voices." Rodrigo stepped back involuntarily, the wood groaned beneath him. The man's head snapped around, his eyes gleaming with a mix of intellect and menace. "Who's there?" Rodrigo fled, racing through the nave and out a side door. The cold night air struck him like a whip, but he did not stop until he reached the safety of his home. Only then did he collapse, breathless, knowing with certainty, the sisters' curse was not buried. Their legacy had been adopted, refined, perfected. And its keeper was no longer a devout village woman, but a figure more dangerous still, an imitator who could bend voices themselves into weapons. At dawn, Rodrigo woke with the false absolutions still echoing in his mind. He could tell no one. If the townsfolk dismissed him as mad, or worse, if word reached the imposter, he would be silenced. Later, at the market, as he tried to feign normalcy, a stern man approached, a weathered face, a gray beard, eyes sharp beneath a broad hat. "Young Rodrigo," he said quietly, firmly. "We must speak." Rodrigo drew back in alarm. "Do I know you?" "Not yet," the man replied, "but you should. My name is Gaspar de la Serna. I was a notary in Puebla until my investigations led me here." Rodrigo narrowed his eyes. "Investigations?" Gaspar studied him intently. "You are not the only one to hear voices in Santa Maria. You were there last night, were you not?" Rodrigo's blood ran cold. He had been careful, yet this man knew too much. "I don't know what you mean," he said cautiously. Gaspar sighed, lowering his voice. "I too have seen the imposter. I know what he carries in that notebook: names, secrets, confessions. The same web of corruption the sisters began. And if we do nothing, it will strangle Tekali again." The market's bustle seemed to hush. Rodrigo realized he was not alone, but that also meant he was entangled more deeply than ever. "Why should I trust you?" he asked. Gaspar's voice broke with pain. "Because I lost a brother to those false confessions years ago. I followed their trail from Puebla to this city. And now, I believe we seek the same truth." Rodrigo saw suspicion in himself war with empathy. The grief in Gaspar's eyes was no disguise. Perhaps, at last, he had found an ally. That evening, Rodrigo joined him. Together they returned to Santa Maria, feigning a quarrel over land. The church shone white in the sun, as if its walls tried to mask the rot inside. Gaspar carried a small notebook filled with sketches and names. "I traced every whisper, every sign," he murmured. "It all points to someone reviving the sisters' work, yet with greater cunning." Rodrigo listened, the memory of the false voice gnawing at him. They waited until nightfall. When the bells tolled 8, they entered the church. The nave was chill, heavy with wax. At the confessional they found it, a symbol carved faintly into the wood, a circle, a crooked cross slashed through it, and 3 dots around. Gaspar went pale. "I know it well." The same mark appeared in the court records of the sisters' trial. Their secret sign, their ledger of stolen confessions. Rodrigo traced the rough carving with his finger. "Then this is no coincidence. Whoever stands behind this knows their history well." A floorboard creaked. Both men turned, catching only the slip of a shadow vanishing into the sacristy. Gaspar snapped his notebook shut. "They found us." A chill swept Rodrigo's spine. Whoever lurked there had been listening all along. There was no turning back. The secret of Tekali was alive, and the hunters had just become the hunted. To be continued in the next issue.